An American Plague by Jim Murphy. Chapter 7 by 12 only. Ye unfeeling savages, ye monsters in the shape of men, remember that your judge will probably one day say to you, I was a stranger, and ye took me not in. Depart from me, ye workers of iniquity. A.B. in the Federal Gazette, October 1793. Saturday, September 14. As Mayor Clarkson approached City Hall that morning, he carried with him the full weight of the city's almost complete collapse. He knew, for instance, that the courts had all but ceased to operate, committees were not meeting, and the work of the Guardians had come to a stop, and Bush Hill was in turmoil, despite the heartfelt efforts of the black volunteers there. One after another, the city's newspapers had suspended operations until only Andrew Brown's Federal Gazette and Philadelphia Daily Advertiser was being published daily. The Nashville Gazette, under the editorial direction of Philip Freneau, appeared from time to time. Taverns were closed for lack of customers, and the street markets remained deserted. Doctors were openly disputing every aspect of the fever, and the College of Physicians, which had promised to meet every morning, had given up. Even the blacks of the Free African Society, the only ones actually doing anything in an organized citywide way, were coming down with the disease. That is why the mayor and a small group of citizens had taken the drastic and illegal step of calling for the formation of a special committee to run Philadelphia. Clarkson and his committee had, in effect, seized control of the government. If he needed proof that this was a necessary action, it greeted him that morning at the steps of City Hall. There, Clarkson had to push his way through a crowd of vendors selling coffins and patent medicine cures. Aside from the mayor, the committee was made up of 26 individuals, though illness and death soon reduced their numbers. In the end, the business of running all of Philadelphia was, as Clarkson would write, principally conducted by 12 only. One of the first decisions made by the committee was to borrow $1,500 for the purchase of medicine, coffins, and a variety of other necessary items, as well as to pay for doctors, nurses, and grave diggers. All told, the committee would spend $37,647.19 to combat the sickness that infested their city. This is a great deal of money even today, but in 1793 it was a fortune. What is more, the members of the committee could be held personally responsible for all this money because they had no legal authority to borrow or spend it. The magnitude of this responsibility and the courage of the committee members became clear when we learned that the majority of them were not wealthy. They were, as the mayor himself put it, mostly taken from the middle walks of life. One of them was an umbrella maker, another built cabinets and other chairs. 2 carpenters volunteered, as did a teacher, a mechanic, a coach builder, and a playing card maker. If they were compelled to repay even a portion of the debt, it would ruin most of them financially. Yet they overcame their fears and took on the responsibility in order to save their stricken city and its people. As president of the committee, Clarkson presided over its daily meetings and helped organize its operation. Specific assignments were handed down out to members. Henry DeForest took on the formidable task of providing food for the city. Samuel Benge took charge of carrying the sick to Bush Hill and seeing that the dead were properly buried. Once the committee began to act, it was everywhere. The members went street by street to catalog the number of houses boarded up, infected, and open. Homes of dead fever victims were cleaned to remove the seeds of its infection. Because relatives were sometimes impossible to locate, the committee began to administer the estates of the deceased who had no legal heirs or executors available. After the Potter's Field and Bush Hill cemeteries were full, they took over the public square nearest Bush Hill and began burying paupers there. Out of a committee of supremely enterprising and resourceful members, one managed to outshine the rest in the range of activities he assumed. His name was Israel, a reserved 47-year-old tavern keeper and merchant. When the first orphans were found huddled near a blacksmith's forge, Israel and 2 others were given the task of finding shelter, care, and support for them. A house was rented, a matron hired, and provisions carted to the door of this new city institution. As more and more children turned up, the orphan committee's burden increased in scope until it was caring for 192 children. But Israel's work did not end with helping Philadelphia's orphans. When complaints came in about the foul smells wafting from the potter's field, smells that many feared were spreading the disease, Israel went with James Sharshwood to personally inspect burial procedures. It was Israel who was asked to arrange for the harvesting of grains at Bush Hill, and it was Israel who headed the committee of distribution, the group responsible for warehousing, the handing out of food, firewood, and clothes to the city's growing number of needy families. Israel's patience, strength, and ingenuity was tested every day of the plague. It was Israel who went to the almshouse to persuade that institution to open its doors to additional paupers. Israel who met with the angry owner of Bush Hill the minute he returned to town to work out fair compensation. He had been called on to help, and he helped in every way possible. Soon after being established, the original committee divided itself up into a variety of subcommittees. Each subcommittee handled a specific duty, such as obtaining 500 cords of wood before winter set in, cleaning the streets, or distributing cash to those in need. By far, the most desperate situation was at Bush Hill. Medical student Charles Caldwell helped out for a few days and then left. The 4 doctors appointed to attend the patients rarely showed up. 2 of them made a number of visits but spent more time performing autopsies on dead bodies than ministering to the sick. When the guardians ceased performing their duties, it meant there was no one to supervise the place at all. The black nurses did their best to care for, comfort, and clean up the sick and dying, but their task was overwhelming. In September, the average number of deaths per day began to rise at an alarming rate, and relatives and neighbors hurried anyone they suspected of having yellow fever off to Bush Hill. Poor people, Matthew Carey noted, were forced to that hospital, though laboring under only common colds and common fall fevers. Over 100 people now jammed the mansion, and the dead lay unburied. As a member of the mayor's committee, Matthew Carey had a special understanding of conditions at Bush Hill. The sick, the dying, and the dead were indiscriminately mingled together, he recalled. The ordure and other evacuations of the sick were allowed to remain in the most offensive state imaginable. It was, in fact, a great human slaughterhouse. The committee sent a delegation to the house, and the list of needed items was drawn up and ordered. A carpenter was found to build beds, a house, carts, and attendants were hired to bring in the sick and carry out the dead. And then 2 committee members, Peter Helm, a barrel maker, and Stephen Gerard, a wealthy merchant, and did an amazing thing. They volunteered to personally manage Bush Hill. We don't know much about Peter Helm. He was skilled enough at his woodworking that the ever-demanding President Washington employed him several times to make objects for his household. He was also a devout member of the Moravian congregation, a Christian denomination that accepted the Bible as the sole source of faith and practice. When Helm read Psalm 9:18, "For the needy shall not always be forgotten, the expectation of the poor shall not perish forever," he knew his duty was to serve them. When he read a little later in Psalm 23:4, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil," he knew he would be safe. Helm was a humble man who brought to Bush Hill 3 enduring qualities: an established work ethic, an endless supply of kindness, and an indomitable spiritual courage. Much more is known about the 43-year-old Stephen Gerard. He was French-born, blind in one eye, and he detested inefficiency and failure. As one of Philadelphia's wealthiest citizens, he could have fled the city, as others from his economic class had done. But he didn't. He had business to attend to, and besides, he did not believe the illness ravaging his city was a contagious plague. He held to his opinion, even though he contracted a mild case of yellow fever during the last week of August, the sort of near miss that frightened many other citizens into either hiding indoors or fleeing to the countryside. Gerard brought along a calm personality, a steely determination, and an unerring sense of organization. And so Peter Helm and Stephen Gerard marched off to Bush Hill in mid-September. Noting his assignment in his private papers, Gerard added, "I shall accordingly be very busy for a few days." In fact, Helm and Gerard would faithfully attend to what came to be known as the pest house for 60 straight days. The first thing they did at Bush Hill was to divide the chores. Helm dealt with what went on outside the building, while Gerard directed what happened within. Helm established a simple system for receiving new patients and having the dead carted away for burial. He set up an area where coffins could be made, provided decent houses for the nurses and other staff members, had the barn converted so those recovering from their illness could be kept apart from the newly ill, and found storage for supplies. He even had the pumps repaired so that fresh water could be provided to patients for the first time. Gerard's task was even more daunting. First, the interior of the mansion had to be cleaned from top to bottom. Patients were put in separate rooms, with the dying in one and the very low in another, and so on. Every room and hallway had at least one assigned nurse, most of whom were volunteers from the Free African Society. And because delirious patients sometimes wandered off, a doorkeeper was stationed at the entrance to keep track of who came and went. Setting up such an organized hospital was hard enough. Keeping it operating was even more difficult. As a hot, humid September limped along, the death rate in the city leaped to over 60 a day, and more wretchedly ill people were shipped off to Bush Hill, often in the final stages of sickness. The number of patients rose as the fever raged on, as many as 140 crammed into the mansion. To handle the increase in patients, the committee ordered that a new structure be built to accommodate them. In the space of 4 days, a house 60 feet long and 18 feet wide was erected, complete with 2 chimneys. Another structure was quickly assembled to store empty coffins and to serve as a morgue. The strain and pressure of operating Bush Hill might have driven less dedicated individuals to give up or ask for replacements. Helm and Gerard stayed at their post. Gerard even helped care for patients. One anonymous witness was astonished by Gerard's dedication and compassion, noting, "I even saw one of the diseased discharge the contents of his stomach upon him." What did Gerard then do? He wiped the patient's clothes, comforted him, arranged the bed, and inspired with courage by renewing in him the hope that he should recover. For him, he went to another that vomited offensive matter that would have disheartened any other than this wonderful man. In a matter of days, Bush Hill was put into decent operating order, and the spirits of the patients began to improve. But both Helm and Gerard knew that one more element was needed if the hospital was to succeed: a full-time physician. Once again, a dedicated individual came to the rescue. On September 16, a 39-year-old doctor and recent arrival to the city volunteered. His name was Jean Devez. It's very likely that Gerard had a hand in getting Dr. Devez to volunteer just when he needed him. Like Gerard, Dr. Devez was French. Like Gerard, he did not believe the fever was contagious, and like Gerard, he did not believe in the rush cure. Gerard had condemned the extreme bleeding and purging as a pernicious treatment that sent many of our citizens to another world. At first, there was some hesitation in the committee over hiring a French doctor. It would seem like a slap at all American doctors, and especially at Dr. Rush. The American doctors who had already failed the Bush Hill patients were so upset that they even promised to show up more regularly. The situation required several days of wrangling and discussions, but in the end, Gerard and Dr. Devez won out. Dr. Devez had not only seen and treated yellow fever while living in the West Indies, he had contracted it twice. His treatment was cautious and gentle. Small amounts of sweetened wine would be given to a patient to stimulate the blood. Quinine would be administered. For nourishment, patients were given veal or chicken broth, creamed rice, and tapioca. Some patients were bled, though only in small amounts. Let the body do its own healing, Dr. Devez was saying. Clean up the patient and sick room to remove noxious odors, provide tea and broth and non-toxic medicines to help the body fight the fever. As conditions at the hospital improved, so did its reputation as a place of healing. When Helm and Gerard took over, no one in the city wanted to be taken to Bush Hill, fearing it was a death sentence. By the end of September, everything had changed. No sooner was a person affected with a headache, Dr. William Ainen observed, than he became anxious to be removed to Bush Hill Hospital. Despite growing evidence that the French cure was effective in keeping patients alive, it still came in for wide criticism. Benjamin Rush attacked the mild methods used by Jean de Vive and others, even though he had no real statistics to back his claims. The French physicians are everywhere getting into disrepute. The increasingly combative Rush asserted they have destroyed at least 2/3 of all who have perished by the disorder. Peter Helm, Stephen Gerard, and Dr. Devise, and all his nurses and attendants did their best to ignore the controversy and labored on. And every day their fame grew. Later, an anonymous author would issue an account of the malignant fever. In it, the writer detailed the amazing work and dedication that brought order and cleanliness to Bush Hill and included special praise for the two managers. What rewards do these men deserve, who were instrumental in the lives of many? They gave up their own to help the helpless. Bush Hill became a pocket of calm and hope, but it could not cure or comfort the entire population of Philadelphia. The city continued to stagger under the invisible invaders' assault. As the days marched along, burials rose in number, reaching 80 on September 17. Elizabeth Drinker heard more stories of friends who had died and lamented. Dissolution, cruelty, and distress have of late resounded in her ears from many quarters. Even the ever-confident Dr. Rush mourned that nothing but the power of the Almighty could stop it. Inevitably, as Matthew Carey realized, the fear in Philadelphia began to excite the terror of the inhabitants of all neighboring states. In New Jersey, the cities of Trenton and Lamberton resolved that a total stop should be put to the landing of all persons from Philadelphia. The city of Winchester, Virginia, ordered a guard at every avenue of the town leading from the Potomac to stop all suspected persons, packages, etc., coming from Philadelphia. Handbills like the one printed in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, were printed alerting citizens to the present alarming state of the malignant fever which rages in the city of Philadelphia. Armed patrols scouted country lanes and byways to prevent disease and infectious persons from coming into the borough. Stagecoaches to and from Philadelphia were stopped. Postmasters used tongs to dip mail and newspaper from the city in vinegar and other substances they thought would purify them. Emotions ran high, driven by the fear of the unknown. In Milford, Delaware, a Philadelphia woman and her black servant were stopped on the road outside of town. Her wagon and all its contents were burned, and the woman was stripped, tarred, and feathered, and along with her servant run off. Citizens in another Delaware town refused to allow one ship from Philadelphia to land and take on fresh water, and they attacked and sank another. To be sure, some of these towns sent money and other items for Philadelphia's relief. Manhattan banned ships and travelers from the stricken town and posted guards at all arrival points, but its citizens also sent along $5,000 in aid. Other towns sent livestock, chickens, and carts of vegetables. From the Widow Grubb of Chester, New Jersey, came 18 bundles of shirts and dresses for the orphans. All donations were carefully recorded in a ledger by the committee to put to use. Still, this outpouring of charity could not change a new fact of life. Before the month of September was out, Philadelphians found themselves surrounded by scared and hostile neighbors. Even if they had wanted to flee, escape was now all but impossible.